Matt Chitharanjan, the co-founder of Blue Tokai, a brand that has revolutionized the coffee industry in India. What started as a small roasting business in 2012 has now grown into one of India's most popular specialty crop coffee brands, known for its commitment to sourcing beans directly from Indian coffee estates and promoting sustainable practices. Before venturing into the coffee industry, Matt pursued his bachelor's in economics and finance from NYU Stern School of Business and a master's in economics from the University of British Columbia. He carries immense experience in areas such as the real estate markets, trading operations in hedge funds, industrial level research in both the United States and India, and the list goes on. In the past 12 years, under his leadership, Blue Tokai has not only become a brand but a movement, educating consumers about the richness of Indian coffee and creating opportunities for Indian farmers. Today, we'll hear directly from Matt about his entrepreneurial journey, the challenges of building a brand from scratch, and the insights he's gained in developing a consumer-centric business in a rapidly growing market. Thank you so much, sir, for taking time out for this session. We hope you find the session great.
I can just keep it thoda upar because we'll have to experiment and then we'll find out.
I think it's
Yep, perfect. So first of all, thank you Matt for doing this, and it's been a very long time since I last saw you. So welcome to Ashoka first of all, and I hope you liked your outfit. It keeps us making us get late to the classes because always there's a queue there, like half a dozen people are always around. So let's start from the outlet itself. So you opened the outlet already at the Gymkhana Club. So this is the first outlet which is not an outlet in a city. This is the first student outlet. So how did the idea come about, and why did you ended up opening a store at Ashoka?
Yeah, so actually we've always thought that our TG was a little bit older than undergrads. So even in most of the outlets that you see, it's sort of working age professionals onward. So we've been always quite skeptical about opening cafes in universities. But actually one of our investors is on the board of Ashoka, and so he was really pushing and saying that the response would be really good here. And honestly, I never expected that there would be such a crowd here. So thank you all very much for enjoying the coffee. I really appreciate it.
So just mentioning about the crowd, so the first week that Blue Tokai actually opened, everything was sold out all the time. So did you really expect this much demand to come up?
No, really, as I mentioned, totally blown away by kind of the response here. Actually, we'll be making some operational challenges, putting in extra machines so that you guys won't have to wait as long. So really blown away.
Okay, so just getting started on learning about your journey. So we read that you have been born and brought up in the USA, and then you transitioned to establishing Blue Tokai in India. So what inspired you to actually make this leap or make this move, and how did you adapt to the differences in the coffee cultures between these two countries?
Yeah, so I was born and brought up in the US, but my father, he's from Chennai, so half of my family still lives in Chennai. I went to college there, I worked there for eight years or so. And then there was a job opportunity that came up for an organization in Chennai. And I thought it would be fun to come be around my family for a year, just spend a year in India. And then I thought I would leave and go back to doing some other jobs either in the US or somewhere else. As luck would have it, as life kind of has it, I ended up being my wife at IFMR. And once you meet someone, your life totally changes. So that's kind of what kept me here. And then both my wife and I, we were at points in our careers where we wanted to do something on our own. I had been doing desk jobs for a long time. And we found that the coffee culture in India at that time was really kind of very different than what you experienced in other countries. On the specialty side, there was no specialty industry really to speak of. There were kind of the commodity coffee brands. Even Starbucks hadn't really been established very well at that point in time. But we found that there were coffee growers who were producing very high quality coffee, but they weren't selling it domestically here in India. And we thought that there would be an opportunity to get people like us who were really passionate about coffee, who understood and appreciated what good quality coffee was, and they would like to have good quality Indian coffee. So that's kind of how we started. It was a very mom and pop operation. We just took a spare bedroom in my wife's parents' house. I would roast the coffee, she would do the packaging, and then it just kind of slowly grew from there.
Yeah, Matt, so like, as you said, you were like planning to building the premium coffee market, and you entered at a time in which India, the commodity coffee was the only sort of coffee available to all of us. So how did you envision that specialty coffee in India is going to take over? Obviously, like after 10 years, retrospectively, you can say that was a very good decision to make. But were you ever apprehensive of stepping into the specialty side, because in India there were like no brands available and there was no sort of a digital inclusion happening at that point of time for you to ascertain that specialty coffee is the next way to go?
So you look at coffee consumption everywhere, all around the world. Specialty coffee has become more and more prominent. In the US, where I'm living, is more than half of the market now. But even in other coffee growing countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, specialty coffee has grown in a short amount of time to be 10 to 15 to 20% of the market. So it's really much tied to income growth. As a country grows more, incomes rise, people switch from tea to coffee, and within coffee they move from commodity coffee to specialty coffee. So though there was no specialty coffee industry established in India at that time, there would have to be something that's unique about India as a market that in the future is not going to happen. If we felt that that's not going to happen. Consumers are just like consumers everywhere else. So we felt it was only a matter of time that specialty coffee would be a big thing. I think we were probably a bit early when we started, but you can see in the last 4 to 5 years the market has really grown considerably.
Right. So we just wanted to ask about the time frame a little bit. So from our research, we read that at the point when Blue Tokai started, Café Coffee, they had over 1,500 outlets all across India, and Starbucks had just entered, like you mentioned. But we just wanted to ask how exactly you went about positioning Blue Tokai and how you found that product market fit.
Yeah, so I mean for us, product was really the core, and it's always been the core of everything we do. The goal was not to start a cafe company, it was to start a coffee product company. So I think that's been a differentiator for us compared to some of the other brands, is that they're more cafe first, right? And even if you look at our outlets, they're not as posh as a Starbucks, for example, right? The fit outs aren't as nice, the chairs aren't as comfy, but the product is something that's a real differentiator for us. And I think as sort of the market evolves, that becomes very important, because if you're only focused on a cafe business, then you're competing with every other brand around you. But if you have a very strong product, then that becomes something that's much harder to replicate. And so that can be a real differentiator.
Like Matt, you say like you want a cafe company, but you want to focus on coffee. But one more thing about Blue Tokai is that more than 70% of the business comes through cafes itself. So how do you think that plays into your motto of like we aren't a cafe company, but we are a coffee company? So what role cafes have to play in Blue Tokai's journey?
Yeah, so right now cafes are incredibly important. But for the first 2 years of the business, we had no cafes. For a long time, it was a small part of the business. It's just that where the coffee industry is at in India right now is cafes are a booming channel. Especially after COVID, people are really wanting to go out and experience things outside of the home. They're less interested in doing things within their home. They want to have unique experiences outside of the home. And as a country, India is very underpenetrated in terms of cafes. There's only around 4,000 to 5,000 organized cafes in the entire country. You compare that to Shanghai, which is just one city in China. There's 10,000 cafes in that city alone. So it just shows you how much scope there is for the cafe market to grow within India. And I think customers are looking for more and more of that. So that's why cafes have become a larger part of the business right now.
Right. So we also just wanted to ask, like, what model you adopt for your cafes. So are they mostly like company owned, like Blue Tokai owns them, or is it like franchise based, or how exactly do you go about it?
No, so we're very, I wouldn't say control freaks, but we don't want to give up the control.
Just do like more like side talk also, like what clear cut answers there will be done in the next 15 minutes if this happens.
Company owned and company operated.
Ask more
There
follow
are
ups.
some locations where we'll get a fit out cafe from a landlord. And actually this is one of those models, right? Where this is where Ashoka has actually invested in the space, and then we come and we operate it. So that's the furthest we're willing to go within that model. Otherwise, most of the stores that are totally company owned and company operated.
So like Matt, you opened your first cafe in Saket itself, and that was your store. and like there was a very interesting story because like it was quasi-legal, and ultimately you had to shut it down because you don't want the authorities to come knocking on your door. So if you could tell us about like how did Blue Tokai evolve into a cafe company, and what was the story of the first cafe in Saket?
Sure. So I mentioned that cafes were not part of our initial plan. So when we eventually raised some seed funding, we moved out of Marco's parents' house, we were looking for a space for roasting. And so obviously we wanted something quite cheap because that's just all back end work. And so we found this area in Delhi called Cithranjan, which at that point in time was just some chicken warehouses. But it was very cheap and it was close to the metro. I remember my uncle was like, we're now opening here, I don't feel safe coming here, but we convinced that the price was too good to pass up. So we opened up the roastery there, we had some extra space. And so then we thought, okay fine, let's put in a small cafe. It was a very tiny sliver, it was just, I think, 250 square feet, there was no food. And this is not a football location, it's not a place where people are just walking by. But we found very quickly that people were coming to us just because they liked the coffee that we were brewing there. And it was very powerful in terms of guiding people to find what kind of coffee that they want, explaining to them what was different about our coffee compared to other coffee available at that time. They could see the roasting happening at that facility, so that was also good customer engagement. And so we found very quickly that having our own physical spaces was really important in terms of educating customers and ultimately growing the brand. So that's how it started from there. Unfortunately, that place kind of, as you mentioned, it was kind of a quasi-gray area. It's called Aurora, so you can't get proper licenses there. And then all of these other kind of not so nice restaurants open up, so we shut our cafe down.
Also, Matt, like one more question which arises is like a lot of like young entrepreneurs, they face these problems with government bodies, and like this was not just the only example. You had a bit of challenges in Bombay itself when you tried to expand. So how did Blue Tokai as an organization deal with these regulatory challenges, these licenses, and that too you coming from America and you not knowing, like obviously knew about the Indian culture and the traditions, but like interacting with the government bodies, and a lot of times they try to extract a bit of rent also, specifically when they see somebody does not know the system well. So what sort of challenges did this bring to you in like establishing connect within the government and like getting the licenses done?
Yeah, so it's a big challenge for any business. I remember the first license that we got in Bombay was a totally fake license. We were just taken for a ride by a consultant. And we had paid so much money that time, only when the authorities came and inspected the license, they scanned the QR code and they said this is nothing. So then we had to fix that. But it's very easy to get taken advantage of if you don't know the system. And the problem is most people rely on brokers, but brokers ultimately end up working very closely with the authorities to ultimately extract more money from you. So over time what we've done is we've hired people who do the liaisoning directly. So at least that it's our staff who's going and interacting with the authority to try and smooth that over. But it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge for our business in particular. Anybody who's operating restaurants or cafes. There's FSSAI inspectors who come, police always want free coffee, MCD officials, so it's sort of a part and parcel of the business.
Yeah, like, that's actually true, like, because like we also had a lot of interactions with the authorities at Ashoka, but like we know like how that can go by. So personally, when I saw the Blue Tokai coffee outlet open, I was very excited. But the thing that excited me the most was when I saw the price card and all the prices were subsidized. And that was like the best gift that Blue Tokai could have given us. But actually, I know that Gymkhana also has the subsidized rates there. So two outlets, Gymkhana and Ashoka. So how do you decide upon the subsidized rates, and like do they ultimately affect your margins, and like you were offering the same cup of coffee for $250 and here it's like for like $100. So how does it affect your margins at the end of the day?
I mean, I hope we haven't discounted so much from 250 to 100. No, but in these cases where we do the discounted rates, it's generally places where we don't have to pay rent. So then if we don't have to pay rent, we're able to pass on that full benefit to the customer. So that's how we sort of manage it.
Right, and I wanted to ask a question about your marketing side of things. So you mentioned that when you started your first cafe, it was all about word of mouth and people enjoyed the brew, so they came back. as recurring customers. But aside from this, what were the other like ways you adopted in order to get more customers to come and try your coffee?
Yeah, so marketing for us has really more been about building education and community through events. So in the beginning we used to do a lot of pop-ups, a lot of farmers markets. When we had that Save the Job Cafe, we used to do pop-ups with other brands. We would do host our own farmers markets there. We used to have concerts come. So it was really more community building rather than putting up a bunch of ads on social media. Now as we've grown, we continue to do that, but that's really more of a hygiene thing rather than something that really we see as really driving our business forward. It's still the best type of marketing that you can do is deliver a good experience to your customers, and then they'll be more likely to tell other people. The good thing about coffee is it's a very community-driven industry. If you're a coffee lover and you find a coffee that you like, you're very likely to go and tell other people about it. So we really spend most of our effort on that rather than trying to acquire customers through paid channels.
Okay, understood. So kind of digressing a bit, we wanted to kind of ask you your experience during the COVID-19 pandemic and when that hit, how exactly that went down, because we know it was a huge challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs and it made a lot of businesses shut down. So there's also a noticeable surge that happened during like in B2C during the pandemic. So how exactly did you go about tackling that and what was your strategy?
Yeah, so that was a very difficult time for us because we still had, I think 60% of the business at that time was coming from the cafe.
Right.
So more than the business side of it is that cafes were able to obviously open, and then we had a huge workforce. So actually at that point in time we were in fundraising. We had a term sheet, and then the term sheet got withdrawn, so then we were in a very, very weak financial position. So the biggest thing for us was how can we take care of the maximum number of employees that we have. So we did end up having to lay off some staff, but by doing that, we were able to pay everybody else, even though they weren't able to work at the cafe. Two good things that came out of COVID is one, deliveries opened up, and I think that was really an inflection point in terms of the growth of people ordering coffee at home. Before COVID, it was around 5% of the revenues of the cafe, but now it's gone up to 40%, even though COVID has obviously gone. So people got really used to the convenience. It's obviously not the same experience as you have when you visit a cafe, but it's so convenient to just open up the app and then in 20 minutes later you get the coffee delivered to you. Even myself, so I have all the coffee brewing equipment at home and I have access to all the coffee, but sometimes when I wake up in the morning I just feel too lazy, and so I order on Syrians and from the nearest cafe. So I think that's been a big change in terms of consumer behavior. So you mentioned that D2C did take off during that time, but I think a lot of mistake that brands made was that they projected that growth going forward. So there was a huge surge during that year and a half, but now since then that growth is kind of plateaued. So anybody who invested really heavily in that channel is now struggling to establish more offline outlets or a more omni-channel approach. The good thing for us is that we've been omni-channel approach from very early in the journey, so at different times, different channels can perform better. So during that time, the D2C performed really well for us. Now it's the cafes that are performing well for us. Maybe in the future it'll be some other channel that will be the main driver.
Yeah, so Matt, like during COVID, obviously the cafe businesses were shut down, but one good thing that happened was that coffee in itself was declared as an essential commodity. And you've talked about your times in which like you used to go and deliver coffees when all the roads of Delhi used to be empty and you could just go drive pleasantly, and that is something that feel very used to Delhi. Like we obviously are used to the traffic and everything else about it. So how was that experience in like delivering the coffees themselves during COVID? And also because at that point in time there was the D2C splurge, and I'm sure a lot of people would have gotten to know about Blue Tokai coffee and they would directly order it there. So do you think the COVID in itself, it might have impacted the cafe business, but the coffee business was in a way benefited from COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think the business is more benefited from the growth in delivery rather than the growth in D2C, because I think that was sort of a temporary thing,
Right.
And consumer behavior has shown that that has not significantly altered behavior, that people still want offline retail and other channels. I was talking to someone and we during that period in Delhi, it was the first time that you could see the sky clearly. And it was crazy how quickly that happened, within 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
So it's almost like maybe every year we should lock down the city for 3 days and then let the earth kind of rejuvenate itself. But that was we were able to get essential passes, and I've never had such clear roads in Delhi driving around.
Yeah, Matt, so like one more thing which is very significant about Blue Tokai and which we don't see in other coffee brands like commodity coffee or specialty coffee is that you highlight the estates from which the coffee has come from. And like whenever I personally purchased a Blue Tokai coffee pouch, I always looked at the estate. So what was the thought process behind it, adding the estate's name to the coffee packets?
So when we started, there was very little awareness of good quality coffee in India, and ultimately the coffee that we serve is only going to be able to be as good as the coffee that's grown at the farm. So there's no magic that we can do that we can source very low quality coffee and do something on the roasting side or on the brewing side and turn that into a high quality product. So for us it's very important that everybody in the value chain gets credit for their contribution, and a huge part of the product that we have is the work that's being done at the farm, which is not done by us, it's done by the growers. So that's why we really wanted to make sure that we highlighted where the coffee was coming from, because it helps raise awareness of what they're doing and helps raise awareness of what makes a good cup of coffee.
Right. So we noticed when we were reading up about Blue Tokai that you still source coffee beans from the original 6 estates from which you started. So how much effort goes into maintaining these long-standing supplier relationships, and why are they so important for Blue Tokai?
Yeah, I mean, so ultimately it's a very much a relationship business. Coffee growers, and I think farmers in general, are very hesitant to enter into contracts. They don't want to structure things very formally. So everything depends on how good your relationship is with those growers, especially if you want to continue to get access to the coffee that they have. So we have a whole team of people who goes and visits them throughout the year. Every year I try and take a trip and visit at least one of the estates to maintain those relationships. So I think, and especially as we grow, it's really important on these growers serving as a reference for us. The same way I said that coffee is a community, so you as a customer will tell other people if you like a coffee that you find. The same for us. If a grower works with us and we are able to pay a better price, pay them on time, be a good customer for them, then they start referring us to other estates. And so we're really proud of the fact that those first 5-6 estates that we worked with in 2012, we continue to buy coffee from them today. And we've added on, I think now there's another 60 estates that we partnered with. So it's been very helpful for us.
Right. So clearly transparency and quality are very important metrics for Blue Tokai. So how would you say you are able to imbibe this knowledge into the customer? Because we've seen a lot of brands try to educate, but not as well as Blue Tokai. Like even the brewers who brew our coffee, I feel like are very well educated on what exact bean is being put into the coffee that's being made for us. So how exactly did they go about doing that?
I mean, I think that's just more important to be authentic. So this is something that we believe is important. So it's not a marketing gimmick for us. As I said, we really want to tell the stories of what's happening on the farm. We really want to highlight where this coffee is coming from. I think that there are other brands who treat it more as a gimmick.
Right.
But I think customers are aware enough that they can see through that very quickly. There's been cases actually where a brand has said this is from estate X, and then the estate owner has put a post on social media saying, I've never sold coffee to that farm. This is not my coffee. So it's gone to that extent. But I think that as long as you really believe in kind of that philosophy in our food book, then customers appreciate that. That being said, I don't know that the majority of customers actually care that it's from estate X. They care more about what does that coffee taste like rather than where it comes from. It's just that for us as a brand and as a philosophy, it's really important to highlight that.
Yeah, and also when you were just starting out in 2012, so this is not a time in which like Indian businessmen, traditional businessmen who run these coffee estates and all, they were aware of like a D2C company or an online company for the matter of fact. So how did you convince them to sell you stuff and like for you to buy from them? Because most of them, they were exporting it outside because they genuinely thought that in India there was no scope for specialty coffee. In India, people don't understand it. In India, they just want like a commodity coffee. So how were you able to convince these old traditional traders in the coffee industry and estate owners to purchase coffee from them?
I honestly have no idea why they ended up selling us any coffee. We're two people who come from Delhi, we don't have any background in coffee, we're saying that we want to buy your best quality coffee, we want to use your estate name, and the market is not there, we want to develop this market. So, and actually there are people who said no to us, so we had approached, there's a big conglomerate, they operate 3 or 4 really good estates. They said, we'll sell you the coffee, but we don't want you to use your name. There was one grower who said, I'll sell you the coffee, but unless you mix it with Robusta or chicory, make it cheaper, your business will fail. So we were lucky that there were 4 or 5 who were willing to take kind of a bet on us. Because ultimately it was a risk for them. Because we said we're using their name on the estate, if we roasted the coffee badly or we did some, unethical things like mix the coffee with lower grade coffee, ultimately can damage their reputation. So there were a few people who I think were a little more forward thinking and they thought, okay, maybe this has some potential. And the good thing is that the coffee growing community is more friendly competition. So even if you meet someone and they're not going to sell you coffee, they're happy to recommend you to their neighbor or someone else. So through that, by getting in with one grower, we were able to get on 4 or 5, and that's kind of how we started. But really, it was more luck than anything else.
Yeah, so one thing that I heard from like other people also, and like obviously my time at Anikit, and they used to talk about how you started off with Blue Tokai. So obviously we know that you started out from one bedroom in your father-in-law's house, and then you ultimately expanded it to be a company valued at about 1500 crore. So how did you ultimately decide when that you shifting it from a mom and pop thing on actually getting venture funding and coming out with this full-time and full-on with all your energy?
Yeah, so it was a process. When we started the business, we didn't put together a business plan, we didn't do a lot of market research. It was more started with the idea of we want this product as consumers. And so let's do this kind of at a small scale to start off. It didn't require a lot of investment at that time. But the response was very good from the very initial stages. So we were able to grow, we actually hired some people who continued to work out of his parents' house. And then kind of reached a point where did we want to keep it a mom and pop lifestyle business or did we want to raise outside capital and scale? So by then, because of the traction that we had and sort of where the business was going, we felt that there was an opportunity to turn this into a significant business. And we did have a first mover advantage at that point in time. We were kind of the people who kicked off specialty industry in India, and so we thought this would be a good time for us to raise capital. Now the thing is, once you raise capital, that's sort of a one-way path. It's not like you can raise capital and then say, nope, sorry, I want to go back and run it as a mom-and-pop business. So it's sort of a treadmill that you start on. So once you take that initial decision, then we've had to continuously raise capital and grow until we're able to later exit to our investors.
And how did Snow Leopard come across to you? Like, obviously you had raised a bit of money from friends and family, but Snow Leopard was the first institutional investor who invested in Blue Tokai. So what was the journey with Snow Leopard and have they exited Blue Tokai as of now?
So, I didn't grow up in India. My wife, she's Indian, but she grew up in the Middle East. So we didn't have any kind of networks that we could tap into in terms of looking to raise funds. We weren't really clued into all of the angel networks and things that have now developed over the past decade. So we just started reaching out to people that we knew. Customers, and actually one of our customers, he said, I'll fund you, and then he ended up backing off. So then Namrata had a friend who was connected to the Kirloskar family. And so they have a family office that does early stage investing. And so then we sent them our pitch, and then we were lucky to get funded by them. They have exited, I think, a third of their position, but they still continue to hold a significant stake, and they're still on our board.
Right. So, when you pick investors for Blue Tokai, what exactly do you look at? How do you ensure that the investor is on board for the long-term vision of the brand, and how do you find that right fit?
So in an ideal world, you'd have your pick of, whatever investors, but unfortunately, I'm not a very good fundraiser, so it's never been that easy. I think one thing that we've never compromised on is sort of the vision and plan that we had. So automatically there'll be people who drop off. So I remember there's a very high quality consumer investor who really loved the product. And he said, I'll invest in your company, but you have to sell the cafes. And that's not something that we felt was a wise business decision, and so that we didn't end up getting funding from that investor. So I think the biggest thing is alignment in terms of what you want to do with the business. Does that align with what the investor wants? And are they willing to back you, or are they going to be operationally involved? Not to say that one is better than the other, but we have very strong conviction in that we sort of know what's best for our business. That doesn't mean that we can't gain from listening to other opinions and get guidance and advice, but ultimately the decision should be ours, not run by the investor. So once those two things are in alignment, then it becomes a price discussion.
Right. So we also noticed that currently your focus is on tier 1 cities. So what are the reasons behind not expanding like very aggressively or like with all your force into like tier 2 cities? And do you vision yourself eventually venturing into them, and what exactly is the plan for that?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of potential in tier 2 cities. It's just not the right potential for us. Okay. So now if I go to any city in India, tier 1, tier 2, even tier 3, there'll at least be 1 or 2 cafes that are serving good quality coffee, right, which was not the case 10, 12 years ago. And these businesses are doing well. It's just that for us and the infrastructure that we've developed, it's more efficient for us to go deeper into markets that we're already in rather than opening 1 or 2 outlets in 100 cities across the country. We'd be better off opening up 200 outlets in the top 4 or 5 cities. In the past, we had tried to open up an outlet in Goa and one in Jaipur, but one outlet just never generates enough revenue that you want to devote the resources to build the back end, to build the supply chain, to build the warehouse, to hire good quality people. So it becomes a bit of an orphan. There's a lot more efficiencies to be gained from going denser rather than going wider.
One more challenge which a lot of founders in the B2C space face when they're like having their growth spurge is operations. So now you come from a background of finance and you love coffee, like coffee was your hobby. So how did you navigate the operational hurdles within Blue Tokai, like having a proper team, having you train the baristas themselves, the iteration in the sector, and also getting like skilled people to work for you? So how were the operational challenges at Blue Tokai in the growth stage and currently also, and how do you navigate through it?
Yeah, so I think in the beginning it was much easier because my partner and I have a very complementary skill set. So I used to do the finance and the coffee, and she used to do the design and the marketing, and so there was good coverage over all areas of the business. Because there was no real specialty coffee industry when we started, it's not like there was a talent pool that we could hire baristas from or hire roasters from. So what we ended up doing, we ended up having to hire outside experts who came in and worked with us for on specific projects, or in some cases as full-time employees. So actually for the past 7 years now, we've had people from Australia and New Zealand who are leading the roastery.
Okay.
So they've been able to take international best practices, apply it to the context here, and ultimately grow the team. On the operations side, we were very fortunate that we hired someone very early on the journey to actually lead the operations, and he had such incredible talent and zeal that he ultimately became one of the co-founders of the business, and now he's as involved as the two of us. So that was, we were very lucky with that, and had he not joined, we would be in a much different place than we are now.
So Matt, like when we last met, you had told me about a very peculiar incident that had happened, and that was like a person had parked his car through the Blue Tokai Coffee store in Connaught Place, and that happened, I guess, a year back. So when such challenges are faced by a growing company with not a lot of manpower, how do you deal with these sort of challenges and like emergency incidences as a coffee company, and do you got any specific mechanisms to deal with it?
Funny enough, the same thing happened at another cafe in Delhi 6 months later. So I don't know why people struggle after having coffee to know what's reverse and what's forward, but it seems to be a problem. But we have a very active cafe management team. So within, like a minute of that incident happening, it goes on WhatsApp. We use WhatsApp a lot for communication. So videos went out, and team visited the site. And actually, in the second case, that cafe was able to be back to operations within the next day. So the entire facade was crashed in by a car, and luckily no one got hurt in any of these cases. But because of the team that we have supporting us, they were able to renovate that cafe within a single day, and it was back up and operating.
And talking about team, most of the startups have ESOP policy, and I'm sure Blue Tokai does as well. So, what do you think about remunerations in a growing startup ecosystem, in which like a few people, they might have to take a haircut on their salary, but at the same point in time they get ESOPs. So, how do you think, or what's a good ESOP policy according to you? And do you think it's integral for any good startup's journey to build a strong team?
So I think it's very dependent on the industry that you operate in. So like in tech, I think people would expect ESOPs, but actually in our industry, in the QSR or the coffee industry, we found that very few people value them. They would much prefer to have more upfront cash rather than the promise of something in the future. I think in a lot of cases too, people have not been able to monetize their ESOPs, so it becomes a thing that they don't attach a lot of value to. If you're able to offer more upfront cash compensation, you'll probably get better people than you would be than if you're only offering a discounted cash rate and higher ESOPs. That being said, then you have to figure out how do you want to align them so that good employees stay with you for a long time. So I think over time, once they're in the system and they see the potential of your organization, then they're more amenable to taking a higher share of compensation at ESOPs. But in the beginning, especially for smaller stage companies, it becomes very risky for an employee because they have no idea what the outcome is going to be.
And also one more thing about growing startups is when you start off with a journey, you try to hire people who are all-rounders, who could do everything, and they're generalists. But as you start growing, you want to hire somebody who is far more skewed to one particular thing. So maybe you want to hire a management person or a markets person or a supply chain guy. And a lot of times what happens is the people who are generalists, they get stuck in the system and it becomes a bit more corporatized. So how do you give credit to the people who've been there with you from the very beginning, and how do you hire these new people who put specific tasks within the company? So what do you look when you're doing a hire, and like specifically if you could answer to us, like I'm sure Blue Tokai hires interns. So what do you look for an intern? What makes a good intern?
So let me answer your first question first. So it's a big problem actually, because for us as a company, we've always tried to promote within.
Ask for investors only something around it. Do investors interfere in the function?
To a certain stage, right? But it's very often that the business grows ahead of your skill set as an early employee of the company. And then that causes tension when then someone gets hired above you who's not been there for the same amount of time and is hired to be your boss. So it's really about explaining to people about what the needs of the business are, where they've reached to in their careers, and what they can do to sort of groom themselves and grow to get to the next level. And then ultimately that works out for some people and it doesn't work out for other people, and you have to take a tough decision. Do you want to have a culture where you value loyalty, or do you want to have a culture where ultimately performance is what's more important? We do hire interns. We unfortunately don't have a very structured program, so it happens to be that if you know someone, there's a little bit of nepotism there, which we'll try and weed out. But generally people are like interested, active, willing to learn, but also be able to demonstrate that they can contribute in some way. We don't want it to be purely a teaching experience for the people that we hire. We would also like that you have some skill set that you're able to contribute.
Right. So we also were wondering that as a startup, when an investor pulls in a lot of money and when you've given them a stake in your company, and then there's some sort of friction or there's some discrepancy that happens, how exactly do you tackle that? And what would be your advice to people who are going in for crowdfunding or any other type of funding, Series A, B?
Yeah, so it's important that you find investors who are aligned with you. I don't necessarily think you should look for people that you're going to be friends with, because ultimately there's a power dynamic there. So at the end of the day, you, especially if they sit on your board or they have some power, you kind of report to them. But you don't want to you still want it to feel like your organization, right? So you don't want to feel like, if I've ever felt like I own a very small stake in Blue Tokai now, but I still feel like it's my company. And so I think that's really important to find that balance. And it's also important to people that you can disagree with, and it won't irreparably damage the relationship. So I've had lots of fights with my investors, and ultimately at the end of the day there's highs and lows, but we're able to still meet up and have a meal or have a beer at the end of the day. So I think that's also very important. But I would say the best thing you can do is don't take investment. If you're able to somehow not, depends on what your ambitions are and your goals are, but if you're able to do that without taking outside investment, you'll be in a much better place. The maximum number of congratulations I get is when we raise funds. And it's the worst. I have no idea why that's the case. No one will congratulate you for like, this is great coffee, or this is, you have the highest repeat rate in the business. Like, actually important metrics, no one congratulates you for. It's when they see that you raised money from some investor, that's when the congratulations come. And I think we're really celebrating the wrong things there. We should be celebrating companies that are able to achieve scale without having to raise funds. That means they have an amazing, solid business.
Yeah, Matt. And one thing about funding is also that sometimes you have to do a primary round of funding and a secondary round of funding also. So have you yourself been part of any secondary rounds of funding in Blue Tokai? Have you been part of any secondary funding in
Blue Tokai?
Yes, so
there's like, some cases there's secondary that happens, some cases there's primary that happens. It really depends on the needs of the business and the needs of the fund. So some funds have to deploy a certain amount of capital, and maybe that's more than the company can absorb at a certain point in time. So then you can split it between primary and secondary.
Also, when we talk about investors, they try to interfere in day-to-day activities as you share. But who has the final call? Is it the founder of the company who has the final call, regardless of how much equity the founder now owns in the company, or is it the investor with a larger check who takes the final call on whether you need to go and put up a new cafe or maybe have a new product launch or stop a business which is already operating?
So that varies from investment to investment. I don't think there's no fixed formula. I think the best investors are the investors who back the vision and expertise of the founders, and they give guidance and expertise, but ultimately the decision rests with the founding team. It's very rare that an investor would have the operational knowledge to be able to pick, like, okay, this is a good location to open up a cafe, and this is not a good location, so we have to open up this location. Because they're investing across many different companies, they have so many other demands on their time. They're not involved in the day-to-day business as the founding team are. So I would be very, very wary of any investor who wanted to exercise that much operational control over their business.
The next question we had was, how does Blue Tokai decide on opening a store in a particular city, or reopening a store in the same vicinity if you're already penetrated in the city? And what sort of cities are the ones that you would want to avoid, and what sort are the ones whom you want to penetrate deeper into?
So we have, the way that we look at it is we look at online sales data to see which pockets of the country are there a high cluster of people who are ordering specialty coffee. So that becomes the first kind of cut. Ultimately, there's a very high overlap between those neighborhoods and the neighborhoods that you would expect. They're typically more affluent neighborhoods within the city. So there's very few kind of surprises that come out. But we always choose to pick slightly less prominent locations within those micro markets. The idea is that you're willing to go a little bit out of your way for a better cup of coffee, but you're not willing to go across town. So we do that because we feel very strongly in the idea of word of mouth, being able to draw in people. And what that enables us to do is get these places at a slightly lower rental rate than having to be on the front side of the market. So that's always been a core part of our strategy, is to pick slightly out of the way locations rather than to be the most prominent. In terms of looking at cities, there's nothing like a city that we would never enter into or something to avoid. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, it's more focused on going deeper into the existing markets that we're in. So the top 7-8 metros of the country is where we see growth over the next 3 years. Then after that, I think the other cities will have grown to a point where we can open up 4 or 5 cafes within a city. The biggest criteria for us is that we have to be able to get to this density of 4 or 5 cafes within a particular city in a short amount of time.
Right. So we would also love if you could just elaborate a little bit on your B2B side of business. So for example, a lot of us have visited the Charlie's Artisanal Bakehouse where Blue Tokai coffee is served. So how exactly do you go about, forming these partnerships, and also how much margin do you then obtain from selling your coffee there?
I mean, so Charlie's is a unique example because that was partnership that we worked very closely with. We were their 60 or 70% of their business, and ultimately we ended up acquiring that company.
Okay.
So now Blue Tokai and Cithranjan are part of the same company.
Okay.
And we do work with wholesale supply to other cafes, to other restaurants, to offices. Within the B2B side, we see more opportunity in the office segment. So the same thing that's happening with office the cafes, where people are looking to graduate from kind of the commodity coffee cafes to specialty coffee cafes. Now that behavior is happening at the office. If I go to a specialty cafe, why do I have to have this crappy coffee from this crappy machine in the office? I want something better. So we see a lot of like MNCs and larger companies wanting to upgrade the coffee offering within their premise. So that's kind of the bigger focus rather than supplying other cafes.
Okay.
And Matt, if you could talk about like within Blue Tokai, your revenue segmentation, how much comes to cafes and how much comes to online sales, and what proportion of online sales happens to Blue Tokai's website and like that are the marketplaces?
So 75% of the total company revenue comes from the cafe. Within that, it's split fairly evenly between coffee and food. 40% is the coffee beverages, 40% is the food, and then 20% ends up being the retail products that we offer.
Okay.
So the coffee packets, plus actually we sell a lot of Suchali's bread through the cafes. Within the balance, 45% is split fairly evenly between the e-commerce business and the B2B business. So that 12% on the e-commerce business is actually split almost 1/3 our website, 1/3 Amazon, and 1/3 quick commerce.
Yeah, and talking about marketplaces, we heard like there was a lot of intense competition in these marketplaces for like anything, like be it like a FMCG good or a perishable item like coffee that has to be brought by customers there. So there's a lot of competition, and also these marketplaces are very tough to manage by. So how have you developed your marketplace strategy, and like how does Blue Tokai team operate and think of a marketplace like Zepto or Amazon, or when it comes to proper coffee, then or Zomato?
Yeah, so I think you very much have to develop a strong relationship with these channels, and the best way to develop a relationship is to scale your business there. Once you become a sort of a category leader, then you get resources allocated to you, an account manager, they're more willing to listen to your plans, they suggest plans for you. And I think the one advantage that we have is that with both Swiggy and Zomato, because we have such a large delivery business from the cafes, the overall business that us as a company are giving to them is substantial. So that gives us more negotiating power in terms of their quick commerce side of the business. But as a small scale, as a startup, it's very, very hard because they have only a limited range of SKUs that they can keep within their warehouses. So they become very, very picky about which brands they keep. But again, the best way is to try and develop a relationship with the category manager there. This personal, as much as it is business and numbers driven, the personal connect really matters a lot.
So I wanted to kind of ask about the innovation side of things. So how do you decide when to launch a new product, like for example the coffee cans or even the cookies and etc. that have been selling? So how exactly do you decide when to make this new product launch, and what is the thinking that goes behind developing them?
So every year we create sort of a new product development calendar that covers both items within the cafe as well as the FMCG side. In terms of deciding how, it's sort of a mix of surveying customers to see where do they see the gaps in our product offering, see what other competitors are offering, see what's happening in other markets outside of India. Are there some innovative things that are happening that could be translated here? So it's a mix of all of these three factors, and then that goes to the MPD team, and then they work on what are the best ideas. Then we have a panel where we sit and we decide which items we should pursue. And there's a tasting that happens before everything is launched, so it ends up being a long process that typically takes us 6 to 9 months to launch a new product.
Talking about new product launches, you recently launched a coffee beer with Beta 91. So could you tell us more about it, and did it root from your own passion of brewing beer initially before you decided on starting a coffee business in India?
Yeah, so actually, instead of brewing coffee, I wanted to brew beer. And so I used to brew beer at home when I had more time. But as I started to look into it, it requires a significant amount of investment, plus the licensing is a big headache. So that's how we ended up doing coffee instead. That was sort of the second passion. But when I was trying to get into brewing, that's how I met Ankur, the head of Bira. So even before starting Blue Tokai, we had some sort of relationship. Then as his brand grew and our brand grew, we reconnected, and you know, coffee stout is a very common pairing, common beer. This would be a very interesting collaboration. I think Bira was trying to do a lot very similar for the beer market that we were trying to do in the coffee market, offering something more premium compared to the commodity brands that were there. So we felt a strong alignment with them, and then ultimately I love beer, so that's how we went.
Perfect. So Matt, we'll be winding down the questions. So like one question that we had, like it's been more than it's been 12 years now to be exact since you launched Blue Tokai. So what has been the biggest learning in the whole coffee ecosystem and the whole Indian entrepreneurship ecosystem according to you? What are the key points that entrepreneurs should remember while starting out in any sort of business in India?
So I think the biggest lesson is that you have to really, more than enjoying coffee, you have to enjoy running a business. So when I first started, I thought, you know, I'll be roasting coffee all the time, I'll be traveling to coffee estates, I'll just be spending all my time doing amazing things with coffee. And especially as you grow, that ends up being like 5% of my time goes to that. 95% of my time ends up being managing people and solving problems and dealing with investors. So really, I think that you have to really enjoy that aspect, because that's where the majority of your time would go. And that's not something that I necessarily knew when I started. I started this because I was sick of doing desk jobs. I didn't want to be like a computer anymore. I wanted to do something physical with my hands. Now I'm doing anything with my hands. I'm working with the computer 90% of the time. So it's a complicated circle. But I still love it. I have a lot of passion for the brand that we've built, and I still really enjoy the day-to-day aspect. And that's what keeps me going more than anything. I think in terms of coffee, it's there's been a great change that's happened. So I think, you know, when we first started, there was no question in the coffee industry. Even for many years, it was very small, very niche. And I think it's been really great to see the acceptance and transformation and customer interest that's come to our industry. As I mentioned, I never would have expected that we would have an outlet at a university and it would be as busy as it is. So I think that just shows how much the industry has evolved in the 12 years since we started.
And how do you think the confidence of the customer has evolved? Like, do you think the Indian customer now knows much more about coffee than it like 5-7 years back? And I'm sure like you guys obviously played a part in like educating these customers, but how much do you think you still have the leeway in like educating these customers and getting them acquainted to specialty coffee?
I mean, I think we just scratched the surface in terms of education. I think the majority of people who are still coming to us are just coming because they find something unique about the product that we have, not necessarily that they understand it. They probably don't understand that this coffee tastes this way because it came from this farm, because it was roasted in this way, because it was brewed on this sort of good quality equipment by trained staff. They care more about, okay, I come to the cafe, this coffee has something that appeals to me, this food has something that appeals to me. That's the biggest thing. So now the opportunity for us is how do we educate consumers, not necessarily having to go to classes and all of that, but are there things that we can do within the cafe that help tell the brand story, that help just give you a little bit of knowledge that, oh, okay, they're doing something different, they're putting a little extra effort in terms of the product. Can we do that in a non-intrusive, kind of unique way? It's still a very large opportunity for us.
Right. So to end the session, we just wanted to ask you a few rapid fire questions.
Sure.
So let's just get started with the topic of the conversation, coffee. So French press, there's latte, there's so many different types of coffee, Americano. Which one's your favorite and what's your go-to order from Blue Tokai?
So I'm a big Americano drinker. I have, I think, 5 or 6 Americanos a day.
Oh my god.
It's purely because I really like the taste and it can be made in 30 seconds. So some of the other brewing methods, it takes 4 to 5 minutes. And I like that in 30 seconds you can have a great cup of coffee.
Okay, so my next question is, what has been your most bizarre customer experience?
Bizarre customer experience. I remember a long time ago when we did an event at the Oberoi, and I thought, okay, Oberoi, this would be very well-traveled, like actual coffee connoisseurs. And this guy came and he's telling me, your coffee's fine, but the best coffee in the world comes from Germany. Because in Germany, in the Black Forest, they have this special soil where the coffee plants grow and they have this amazing flavor. So Germany doesn't grow any coffee. Like Germany is not known for coffee at all. It's just that they must have liked some roaster from Germany, and so he assumed that that coffee came from there. So I think that was really eye-opening to me that, you know, everybody thinks they're a coffee expert.
Yeah.
But actually the general knowledge that people have about coffee is quite low.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I can obviously see the pain in your eyes by just explaining that customer
I just said
experience.
that.
Yeah, and also like one more thing, like okay, we've asked the customer point of view, but also we're gonna ask the investor point of view. So what's the most bizarre thing like an investor has asked you to perform, like as in the company wise, like the most bizarre expectation they've set on you and you've been just like awestruck by it?
I mean, I don't have a specific example, but I would say that in the beginning, you look at your investors as, oh, they gave you money, so you have to listen to everything that they say. So I think they also want to feel like they're adding value to your business. And so they end up getting involved in things that they have no business of getting involved in. So I think that over time, as our business has grown and we become more confident, now we just push back and we don't have to deal with kind of the silly requests that used to come really much smaller.
Right. So also we know that a good book goes along with a good cup of coffee. So what would be your book recommendations for us?
Actually, I'm reading this Netflix book right now. It's called No Rules. That's a really good management book. We're going to try and hopefully implement some of those things within our company. But that's the book that I'm reading now.
Yeah, and alongside books, last question, films also go together. So any top 3-4 films that you would want to recommend us?
Yeah, I like gangster movies. So Heat, I don't know if you've seen Heat. That's one of my all-time favorite movies. Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. Godfather is another. And then if you haven't seen the TV series The Wire, I would highly recommend that.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Matt. So we'll be having audience questions. So if anyone of you are interested in asking any questions, okay. So we've got one logistical problem with us. The mic is wired, so if you could just come here one by one and just ask the questions, Tirupati can help you with that.
Hello, hi sir. First of all, I absolutely love your coffee. My family is a very religious Blue Tokai drinkers. And the Priya Market Vasant Vihar branch, we've been doing it for years, so we know all the baristas there. So I'd like to ask, from what I know, at least a year or two ago, you weren't earnings or cash flow positive. So before you sort of figured out your unit economics, how do you, what gives you the confidence to sort of scale so aggressively? Or what do you see happening at a later stage that will allow you to?
Sure. So I think on the unit economic perspective, that's all sorted. It's just that because we're in a growth phase, our corporate expenses are significant compared to the profit that's being generated from each of the channels. So every single one of the channels has positive contribution margin. And actually finally this last month we became EBITDA positive. So now we finally reached a stage where we're able to absorb that. But I would say that first, you have to make sure that each of the channels are delivering positive margin. And then do you see a path where that margin will be able to cover your corporate costs?
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Guys, could you just go there in the line?
Hi, good evening. I just wanted to ask, with the climate change affecting coffee plantations in an adverse way, and then the consumer pattern shifting a bit more towards sustainability, how do you see Blue Tokai taking specific steps and what steps in not just mitigating those risks, but also being more of an industry leader while also cultivating positive relations with the farmers who are ultimately the sources of the coffee itself?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to that. One is definitely climate change is a huge issue at the farm level, and we've seen that coffee harvests are becoming more erratic. In certain years, there's significant crop loss. So I think one big benefit that we have is that we are long-term partners with the farmers. So even if in a year they have a lower harvest or lower quality harvest, it's not that necessarily we cut them off. We still continue to work with them and buy their product so that they know that there's at least income stability from us. On the climate change side, actually we're working with a few states to develop new coffee species that are more climate resistant. So I think most of the coffee is Arabica and Robusta, and neither of these are actually very good or well suited for the future world. but there are actually 1,000 species, other species of coffee. And so, and I think actually next month or this month we're launching a new Explorer pack that has 3 undiscovered or unknown coffee varietals. So this, we really see these as a potential
Is this muted?
solution.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tirupati, just
Good evening, sir.
keep the mic
I
away
have
from the
two
speaker.
questions for you.
Usse echo hota hai.
First, 16.
We won't be too hard, don't worry.
What inspired you to start Blue Tokai? First question. Second is, how did you identify that gap in the Indian coffee market? And third, could you provide me some business metrics of the Blue Tokai? Like, what is the turnover now? How many cafe outlets across India? And how much you're expecting to increase your turnover in the next year? Suppose next year and next 5 years.
So the first two are actually quite similar. We started it purely out of a passion for drinking good quality coffee, which we didn't see available in India at that time. So as consumers, we didn't see any specialty coffee available to purchase. There was only the commodity coffee or imported coffee, which was very expensive. So the company was started really out of a personal desire to have coffee for us to drink. In terms of business metrics, we have 120 outlets right now. We do roughly 30 crore turnover a month. Where do we see us going in the next 5 years is to open another 250 outlets. Turnover should roughly 4x during that time. So that's kind of what we see the path.
4x is how many years? Like you have 30 crore revenue, right? This turnover. And how much
क्या कह रही है ये?
expecting this 30 crore to increase in the next year, suppose financial year, post 20?
I mean, we're growing by
भाई
70% a
इनको
year.
कर दे क्या हमें क्या
70%.
इनको कुछ मैट से काम तो नहीं है ना? हाँ सही है, इनको कोई बोलेगा ना मैट के लिए ये करना है वो करना मना करना है.
Hello, thank you. That's a great talk. So I was wondering, since like at the end of the day, Blue Tokai ends up catering towards a sort of relatively niche and elite audience, and you said that you're not looking to expand beyond tier 1 cities right now. So that's looking at like a very dense expansion within a certain area. So how do you sort of look at it in a way where that demand doesn't play to? And also because you said that you're not into doing a franchising model. And in a franchising model, there's less sort of financial cost involved and less responsibility overall. But in case you're investing into each restaurant on your own, that's also like a bigger sort of high-risk investment if the restaurant doesn't work. And if it's a dense sort of proliferation that you're looking at, wouldn't beyond a point, like your own restaurants start eating up into each other's demands in a way? And sorry, there's another aspect of this question, I'll just continue with that. And say that would be mitigated by expanding into tier 2 cities and opening small amounts of restaurants there, but that is also limited in some ways. So would that either so do you end up in some ways creating demand beyond a point after you've sort of exhausted the amount of people who are willing to consume this product?
So I think there's 2 points here. One is the first point that I mentioned about the number of cafes in India still being very, very low. So one, currently the market is very underpenetrated, and 2, more and more people, coffee is growing much faster than other segments. So one is there's scope to grow within the current market, but that market is also growing at essence like 15% a year. So that's very significant growth that enables us to open up more outlets. And the other thing that we've seen is that there's very little competition that's happening right now because of this. So there's places where we were first, then a third wave came, then a Starbucks came, then a Chayo's came, and actually all of those 4 brands end up doing better because what it does is it grows the market more. So it's really right now, at least for the next 3 to 5 years, we see the market is more of a, we're all helping contribute to a larger pie rather than stealing market share from each other. In terms of financing the stores, because now we're breaking even, next year will be profitable, with the amount of capital we raise plus our internal accruals, we should be able to open the 60, 70 a year from that. So that's why we don't look at franchising.
And what about tier 2 cities? Like how do you, since there's not a lot of demand there, do you see yourself at some point sort of creating coffee culture in cities?
Yes, I think the 3 to 5 years, I focus on these larger markets, but after that, the larger demand will be coming from expanding into some of the smaller cities.
Hi, Matt. I think you would be. Hi, Matt. You would be really happy to know that you've been making our pockets go broke with but my main question was that how do you deal with competitors who want to copy you? For example, somebody could just open up a pink roaster and sell some similar type of coffee in the same model as yours. How do you still differentiate yourself and become stay the Blue Tokai which you are and become even more?
So I think there's a couple of things. One is that even if someone opens up a pink coffee roasters, we are now at a stage where we have some brand equity. So making sure that we really deliver a very strong customer experience, never compromise on the product quality, and maintaining that brand equity is incredibly important. This has happened in many cases where a local coffee company is opening next to ours, and the feeling is that, okay, I'll steal some of the other guys' customers. But we are lucky. We have a very loyal customer base, and because our product quality hasn't dipped, it's very difficult for other competitors to kind of steal our market share.
Excellent. So my question was about how, even when we talk about startup culture here, we're always talking about the company that's disrupting like a national market or markets beyond that. And so, as someone that had a passion for coffee but also a background in finance, were you always looking at it from the large, massive company chain sort of model? And do you think there's scope for a small cafe or a small restaurant still in tier 2, so tier 1 cities where they're not so focused on expanding massively but opening something small?
Yeah, so we never started this business to become a big company. It was purely started because we wanted to have good quality coffee to drink ourselves. It was only after doing this for several years that we saw that it was an opportunity and we were on this path, so we decided to take that. That being said, there's many small, either 1, 2, 3, sometimes 10 local chains with phenomenal business in cities. We had one of our old employees, he left and he started a coffee company in his hometown, and he's doing fantastically well. I mentioned we were in Jaipur. There are many cafes in Jaipur who are run by local entrepreneurs, and they're all doing well. So I think it's definitely possible to make a nice, lifestyle business out of coffee.
Hi sir, my name is Yash. I just wanted to ask you what the initial challenges you faced when you started the business were and how you overcame them.
I think people was a big part because there was I mentioned there was no specialty coffee industry. It was very difficult to find people who had the skill set that we required. So then I mentioned we found international experts who were willing to work with us, so that was very helpful. Then I think the other thing is it's a very operationally intensive business. So it's also a business where it's very easy to get taken advantage of. Because we never had made a cafe before, we probably paid the most expensive cafe we ever built was the crappiest one that we had instead of the job, because we had no idea what we were doing, and it was we weren't able to control the costs appropriately. So I think it's very important then to identify and to groom people who then become kind of the pillars of the company. So if I look at the first 3 people that we hired, they still work for us today. They end up leading the roasteries in 3 cities. Our co-founder, he was, I think, the 12th person that we hired. So we got really lucky, but we were also able to offer them an opportunity where they were able to grow and really flourish. So I think that's really important.
Hi Matt, thank you for coming here. It's been great to listen. I am not a coffee drinker.
I'm sorry, next question.
I'm going to say something nice. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I'm chronically in the outlet that's a 10-minute walk away from my place. And I'm really curious about whether there's a process that Blue Tokai goes about in terms of retaining customers who don't drink coffee, because I'm definitely in love with the brand. I don't know what it is about it. It might be the seasonal drinks that you guys have. I just see it as a very innovative brand. So I'm curious about the thought process behind that.
So, I mean, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have, we would just be able to serve coffee and the economics would work, but that's not really the reality. So I think one is food is an incredibly important aspect of it. So having a food offering that's differentiated, but yet still follows the same philosophy that we do with coffee, and that's where Suchali is really spinning very nicely. Their philosophy with bakery is very similar to what we want to do with coffee. So that was really important for us. And then also, as you mentioned, that everybody is a coffee drinker, and especially if you're coming with a group of people, there might be someone who's not interested in coffee. So we have tried to have some non-coffee items that end up rotating. We've tried tea, but actually it doesn't sell at all. No one comes and has tea in our outlets. But the coolers have done well, and some of the non-coffee, non-tea and stuff.
Thank you.
Trouble. Two more questions.
Hi.
That's it.
I'm also a coffee drinker. I absolutely love it. And especially Blue Tokai, it's awesome. The question that I have for you is, since you are so passionate about coffee, what are your views or opinions about instant coffee? And is Blue Tokai ever going to delve into that? Apart from the easy pour versions that we already have in house.
Yeah, so I have nothing against instant coffee at all. It's just right now, the taste is not something that I enjoy. And actually, instant coffee plays a really important part for the growers, because what they end up doing is they sell all the lowest quality coffee to the instant coffee producers, and that's a way for them to get realized value out of, not every state is going to have 100% specialty coffee. There's going to be a lot of kind of lower quality or reject coffee. And it's great that that can be used and turned into a product that then can be consumed. So I think as a form factor, I have nothing against instant coffee, and if we're ever able to get it to a taste that we can put the Blue Tokai name on, then we'd be very happy to launch that.
Thanks so much.
Hi, Mark. Matt Chitharanjan. So, I have a very important question. So, you were the first mover in the market. So, in this business, what we have got as first mover advantage, but not necessary. For instance, when Cola and Uber started, they did well for sure, but when Juice Mart came in the market, because they have made the market so mature that the market is ready to hop on the Juice Mart and the market. In your case also, you actually created a category defining product. In a sense, from buying 1 rupee brew or an Nescafe sachet for a family to buying an easy pour that costs like about 25 to 35 bucks, somewhere in that range. So, how did it feel like? I'm sure it was challenging, but if you could just talk about that.
So, actually, we weren't the first mover. There was another company called Indian Bean who had started before us. So I think necessarily being the first doesn't mean that you have an advantage if you don't do anything with that. So we were fortunate in that we were able to use that to reach a certain scale, and then it becomes, I would say, more defensible advantage. So I think that's kind of how we thought of it. And it was more like, within coffee, it's not that we created specialty coffee, right? This has been a trend that's happening in many other markets. So we're also lucky that we can kind of see what's happening in other parts of the world, where the coffee industry is a bit more advanced than it is here, and then we can see which are some of these innovations that are can be translated to the Indian market. So that's kind of how we've looked at it.
I have a follow-up question. So you were talking about growing beer. I'm a big beer fan. So the best thing I like about going to a brewery is trying those 6 or 7 or 8 tables that they have. Yeah. So do you have any plans that whenever I walk into a Blue Tokai, that you will have smaller versions or testing versions of different coffee brands that people can order it from?
So we do. We've done that in the past. The challenge, I would say, that's different with beer is that beer you can just have it on tap, right? But coffee you have to keep brewing it all the time. So it's very difficult to keep a wide range. So what we end up doing is anytime we have a new beverage or a seasonal beverage, we end up making small servings, and then we go and distribute it throughout the cafe. But in terms of like doing tasters for different types of coffee, that's operationally a challenge we haven't been able to figure out yet. Yeah, but there's not so many people who are interested in that. We've tried in the past to have like flights. So like three different beverages, but offtake has been very low.